Last week, just as a real quick summary, remember we ended chapter 40 with Joseph in jail. And I'm just going to read the last few verses in there. It said, "Thus, at the end of the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer." Remember, Joseph said he would be restored. And the head of the baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. And then you remember the last verse there, very sad. It says, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." Joseph interpreted the dreams of these two men, and when they came about, he said to the cupbearer, "Please remember me to Pharaoh." But Moses wrote, "The cupbearer forgot him." Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. I thank you for the gift it is to us. I know we do that all the time, but it's such an incredible thing that you've given us. I pray for wisdom from the Spirit of God for all of us, that we may be able to understand your word, that we may be able to learn, to grow, to become better servants of yours. And Father, too, I thank you that you care about us in each and every detail of our life. Thank you for these things in the name of our Messiah. Amen. Moses starts, he didn't actually make chapters, we did, so I'll say, but Moses starts chapter 41 this way. "Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he is standing by the Nile." The time between chapter 40 and 41 is 2 full years, and he has a dream. Remember, at the end of chapter 40, Joseph said to the cupbearer, "Listen, when you get your job back, mention me to Pharaoh. You mention him to me. I'm here unjustly." And it's 2 full years later. I don't know how many times, if you've had the experience in your life, that you wait 2 full years for God to do something. I know there are people that wait a lifetime for God to do something. And it's really hard and difficult. It's a bitter time when we're calling out to God for something that we think is right. And in this case, Joseph, being totally innocent, calling out to God, hearing nothing for 2 years. And yet, he remains faithful to God. His attitude here really is, God knows and I'll wait. That's an incredible attitude to have. 2 full years. And then Pharaoh has a dream. Moses writes this, verses 2 to 7. "And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat. They grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. And then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream." Pharaoh's dream came in 2 parts. And I don't attach any special significance to this, just to notice that it's a little odd. Every time Joseph's involved with dreams, it involves 2 dreams. Did you ever notice that? First, he has the 2 dreams. He has the dreams of the sheaves bowing down to him. Then the second dream was the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him. 2 dreams. Then he's in jail. The cupbearer and the baker come. 2 dreams. Then Pharaoh also has 2 dreams. And when we see Joseph in dreams, for some reason there's 2 dreams that are connected this way. And the dream was so real to Pharaoh that he didn't realize it was a dream until he woke up. That's what it says. "Behold, Pharaoh woke up. It was a dream." I think everybody's had a dream like that, where you have one of those weird things. You wake up, "Oh man, am I glad that was a dream." Maybe that's just me. I tell Sharon my dreams that I vividly remember, and she tells me, "Those aren't dreams, those are nightmares." So it's a little bit different. But to Pharaoh, he woke up and then he realized, oh, this didn't really happen. It was a dream. And the dream in this chapter of Genesis 2, and this is another thing that adds to the credibility of the Bible. People always attack the Bible, but there's little weird things in there that you don't think about. And this is one of them. This section is a very Egyptian section. It's written in Egyptian style. It's using Egyptian words, Egyptian imagery. And what else would you expect? Because this takes place in Egypt. There's all those little things. For example, this idea, it says he's standing by the marsh grass. The word that's used there is an Egyptian word. And sometimes you'll see in the Bible, they call them loan words. It's a loan word from the Egyptian because the marsh grass, the reeds that are by the Nile, it's the only place in the world that this kind of grass grew. And that's why an Egyptian loan word is used. It just makes perfect sense, and it's so simple and so clear. Something happens in Egypt, it's written using the word. That's what Moses uses. Really, just little things. But there's a vivid picture of the cows and the grain, and I found a video to give us Pharaoh's dream. So if we could play the Pharaoh's dream video, we'll actually see what Pharaoh was thinking. There he is, that's Pharaoh. Egyptian imagery. That's the actual dream that Pharaoh had. You can see how that might cause you to lose a little sleep, having a dream like that. But this is, Pharaoh has all these images in his head. And in verse 8, Moses writes this: "Now in the morning his spirit was troubled. And so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh." The dream made Pharaoh very uncomfortable. And I'm sure that at least once, if not more, in your life, you've had a dream that you woke up and it gave you that weird feeling in your stomach, a feeling that wouldn't go away for a while as you thought back to that dream. And that's what happened with Pharaoh. He was very uncomfortable about the dream he had. And then he calls the magicians and the wise men. And the word for magicians, again, that's another Egyptian loan word. They were diviner priests. That's who they were. And the wise men, they were men who would interpret all the sacred texts of Egypt. So he gets together all his brain trust, and he wants to know what the dream means. He gets everybody together. And it reminded me of another situation that happened centuries later. If we could play that second video.
When worlds collide. Written in the stars is a message of doom for this, our world. And now, in the most shattering experience the screen has ever given you, Paramount tells what could happen within your lifetime when worlds collide. An astronomer checks and double-checks his horrifying discovery. A distant star racing through space toward an inevitable collision with this planet. The United Nations meet in emergency session. All conflicts pale before this threat from another world.
If you wait until the danger is visible to the naked eye, it will be too late to escape.
High on a mountaintop, an army of scientists work desperately to build this giant rocket, this modern Noah's Ark, to carry a few picked survivors of our doomed civilization to a new life on another world, reaching the heights of self-sacrifice. the depths of the animal lust for survival as they fight to be among the few who can be saved.
Let's take the ship away from them! Come on!
There's always one of those
Fighting among
guys.
themselves, fighting against time, as doomsday is upon them.
I think all you scientists are crackpots. Nothing is going to happen.
When worlds collide, you'll see the most amazing, awe-inspiring scenes ever put on film. The forces of nature unleashed in all their terrifying force. Tremendous tidal waves smashing New York City. The molten fires from the bowels of the earth gushing out to consume our world.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite movies of all times. I watch it at least 2-3 times a year. And if you watch it, there's several Bible verses in there. So it's biblical. From the Bible opens with Bible verse, ends with a Bible verse. But the point in watching this whole amazingly well-crafted, filmed in Technicolor, believe it or not, movie, is that when something happened, they met at the United Nations. I'm personally not a fan of the UN, but that's another story. But they meet at the United Nations because why? They get every person in the world they could think, every sign to everybody. This is kind of what happened in Pharaoh's world. He got, it says, all the magicians, all the wise men. He got everybody. And remember, Egypt at this time was a world power. The biggest power in the world at the time, and he got everybody he could think of together because he had this dream and he wanted to know what it meant. And the bottom line was, nobody knew what it was. At least these guys were honest, and I think that's partly because God prompted them, but they said, we have no idea what it means. You remember in the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar has dreams, remember the guys interpret it, and then the other time they say, hey, just tell us the dream, we'll tell you what it means. Yeah, sure. Nebuchadnezzar said, no way. You tell me the dream and tell me what it means. And so only God could do something like that. And I think that God had this situation set up like that too. Pharaoh got everybody he knew, everybody, every advisor, every person that had some kind of credibility, and they all said to him, we have no idea what it means. And in the midst of this, the chief cupbearer speaks up. In verses 9 to 13, Moses writes this. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants and put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. And just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. So this is kind of a little rehash of the preceding chapter, which we looked at last week. The chief cupbearer sees all this going on. He sees how concerned Pharaoh is. He sees what a big deal it is. And then he remembers Joseph. Then he remembers what happened to the dream. And he brings it up to Pharaoh. And he takes a little bit of a chance because he said, listen, I'm kind of hesitant to tell you, but if you happen to remember a few years ago, you were angry, you put me in jail because of my offenses. And then he tells him the story of what happened in there. He's kind of giving Pharaoh the behind-the-scenes event. I'm certain Pharaoh remembered the cupbearer. I'm certain he remembered the baker. I'm certain he remembered putting them in jail when he reminded them of this. But the cupbearer gives him the behind-the-scenes. This is what happened when we were in there. And who knows why the cupbearer forgot? First of all, maybe he genuinely forgot. I don't know. Secondly, he may have thought, like, who cares about this kid? He's just a slave. I'm a noble. And the other thing is, why would he want to remind Pharaoh that he did something wrong? You know, Pharaoh was the ultimate power in the world. He's not going to bring, hey, remember the time I got you really angry? Nobody's going to want to do that. But I think the bottom line is that it wasn't God's time yet for whatever reason. And he engineered this dream for Pharaoh and made the cupbearer recount what actually happened. And then in verse 14, we see what happened. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to see, when he changed himself, he came to Pharaoh. We could see how bad Pharaoh wanted to know what the dream went. He just hears this thing from the cupbearer, and he immediately sends into prison and has this felon brought before him. That's what he does. And it says that he had to shave himself and change his clothes. And that's another interesting thing. That's an Egyptian thing too, because whenever you notice pictures of ancient Egyptians, they don't have beards. They might have those cool little king tuts or a soul patch or something, but they don't have full beards. But children of Jacob, the people of Abraham, they all had beards. So he's being brought before Pharaoh. So what do? It's another little Egyptian detail. They want to present him before Pharaoh. He's got to be cleaned up. We need to shave this guy. We don't go for beards here. And then they give him new clothes, new robes. And it made me think about something. Have you ever noticed in Joseph's life, every time he's associated with some kind of clothes, there's a major change in his life? Did you ever notice that? He starts out by his dad giving him the vari-colored, the long-sleeve tunic. Remember? Set him apart from his brothers. That changed his life entirely. That got him sold into slavery. Then he becomes a slave in Potiphar's house. Remember? He goes in there, Potiphar's wife, I guess the right word is makes a play for him. And he runs off and she grabs his cloak and she has his cloak. Once he has that cloak, major change in Joseph's life. Now Joseph's in jail and he shaves and they give him new clothes to come and appear before Pharaoh. Another major change in his life. And not to step on Mickey's passage next week, but when he's promoted by Pharaoh, what does he get? It says he gets a robe of fine linen. Every single time Joseph has a change of clothes, he's got some kind of change going on in his life. And I don't know if he noticed that, but it's an odd thing. But you could do the biography of Joseph by his clothes. I mean, you really could. So he gets all this stuff, and then he goes and meets Pharaoh. And if we could see that picture, I like this picture. I told you, it's hard sometimes to find things that are accurate. I know the When Worlds Collide was incredibly accurate. But I like this picture a lot because it really shows Pharaoh in his court. There's Joseph standing in front of him. Pharaoh on his throne, all the people around. You see the grand hall that's in there. And Joseph comes out of jail and he's presented before, actually we could say the leader of the known world. Most important person in the ancient world. He stands before Pharaoh with all of Pharaoh's people around him. And Joseph speaks to Pharaoh. 15 to 24, I'm going to read this whole account of Pharaoh giving Joseph the dream. It says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph. In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I have never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk, and lo, 7 ears withered and thin, scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. And here we see Pharaoh's eagerness to understand the dream. Here's Joseph comes before him, and Pharaoh's the one that initiates the conversation. Pharaoh's the one who speaks directly to Joseph, and he tells him the entire dream. And then he says, I heard that you could understand this kind of thing. Let me make one point too, because I think this is important. This goes to the credibility of the text. If you notice, this account is slightly different than the first account Moses gives us. A few minor differences. There are Bible critics who say that this proves that the Bible really had many different authors in the book of Genesis. We believe the Bible teaches Moses is the author of Genesis. These people believe there's several different authors. We could talk about that later, but they say this is a different author because he uses different language. Well, the simple explanation is that first Moses is telling us what happened, and now it's Pharaoh himself, and in a way Pharaoh's giving his own feelings about what's happening and what's going on. People that think that there's two different authors in this and that the Bible text is not reliable, there's a theological term for that, and it's called baloney. So if somebody comes up and they criticize different things, listen, it's a very long, there's books and books and books that are written on all these different minor points to show that they indeed are credible texts. So just remember in the back of your head, even if you don't know the exact technical reason exists, and the simple theological term is that's baloney. So Moses gives us the overview. Pharaoh tells us what he's thinking. And Pharaoh said, hey, I heard you can interpret dreams. And what does Joseph say? He said, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And again, remember this kid. This is a kid who was told he was going to be great, lead his brothers, rule over them. And what happens? He's a slave. Not just a slave, he's sold into a house. Not just sold into a house, now he's in jail. Now he has a chance to get out, the cupbearer. And what happened? 2 full years happen. And all that to Joseph, like nothing's happening in his world. He comes out, what does he say? No, it's not me. It's God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. I really like that he says, no, literally what the text says is, it is apart from me. That's what Joseph says. You can understand, no, it's apart from me. It's God. And when he says God will give a favorable answer, the word favorable is the Hebrew word shalom. Now, many people think of shalom as hello and goodbye, which it is. But the underlying meaning of the word shalom is wholeness or completeness. And that's when people say you have shalom with God. There's a wholeness. The relationship is restored through Jesus. It's a wholeness. It's completeness. And what he's really saying to Pharaoh is, listen, it's not me. It's apart from me. It's God. And God will give you peace. What he's saying is, I'll tell you the dream, it comes from God, and it will set your mind at ease. That's really what Joseph says, which I think, that's a great answer. It's a lot better than, no, it's God, and, you'll be cool after this. It's much deeper than that. Your mind will be set at ease. Good idea came from God, and he talks about it. And Pharaoh says, in his dream, Pharaoh says the cows were poor and ugly and gaunt, and he said, such as I have never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh tells Joseph, after these ugly cows ate the good cow, I've never seen cows like that my entire life. Never. We've never had any situation like that. And that grain, he says, it's scorched by the east wind. In Israel today, in the Middle East in general, but in Israel, there's an east wind that comes, and it's very hot. If you have the opportunity when you're there in the summer, they call it the chamsim, the hot east wind. That's the same word that's used in here. The chamsim comes in and destroys all the grain. It's God who's controlling not just events, but literally the environment to have this dream come about. And Pharaoh says, listen, I asked everybody and nobody could tell me what it means. I have no idea. And 25 to 32, here's Joseph's explanation, very simple and clear. Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, and the dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means the matter is determined by God, and God will bring it about quickly. Joseph doesn't hesitate to give Pharaoh the news, the good news and the bad news. He tells him, 7 years good, 7 years of famine. And he says the fact that you had this dream twice shows the matter's already settled by God. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen quickly. And then Joseph goes on from this. He interprets a dream. Pharaoh didn't ask what he should do, but Joseph tells him. 33 to 36 and 7. It says, Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him extract a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and all his servants. You think about what happened here. Joseph comes out. It says Pharaoh got him hurriedly. Joseph, he has no idea what's going on. He's in jail. They come in. Hey, you got to shave. Here's your new clothes. Bang, you're in front of Pharaoh. Here, Pharaoh gives him the dream. He interprets the dream, and he comes up with this plan. I mean, that's the mercy of God shown in his life. This is a pretty intense plan, simply outlined. You need some point person. He needs to oversee people. You need to take a fifth of the grain. I mean, this whole thing is all outlined, and he gives it to Pharaoh. Right there. Lets him know what he needs to do. Joseph outlines his plan. And as a result of this, he gets the job. That was not Joseph's intention. Absolutely not. I don't think he was thinking anything about that. And I'll tell you, as odd as this sounds, I got a job like this once. We had somebody in the mission that I was working for, and that person was leaving, and they were talking about hiring somebody from the outside. A lot of times people think that working in ministry is like totally different than working in a secular world, and a lot of times it's not. If you're working at a company and they want to bring in a new supervisor and they would start talking about someone from the outside, that's not really ever good news. I mean, is it really? I don't know, maybe you think it is, but, I'd rather have somebody that knows. I'd rather have somebody that's been there. I'd rather have somebody that understands what's happening, and that's what I want. I don't want somebody from the outside coming in, because the outside people, they always have these really crazy ideas that usually make your life miserable for several years until they realize those ideas don't work. That's why we weren't using them in the first place. But, personal opinion. But they were looking for somebody to replace this person, and they started talking about having somebody from the outside come, and I got a little concerned, and I said, listen, I don't mind having somebody from the outside, but let's talk about what they need to know. They need to know this, they need to know this, they need to understand this, they need to understand that, and I went through the whole list of things that I thought were very important, and when I got done talking, one of the people on the board said, I think we're looking at that guy. And I wasn't looking for the job. I was just trying to protect myself and all the people that I worked with, but I wound up getting the position. I could understand how this could happen in real life. This is a real event. Pharaoh said this, and Joseph said, hey, you know what? We got to do this and this and this. And Pharaoh goes, hey, you're the guy. And Joseph gets promoted. It's pretty incredible. So, this chapter, what can we say? Very briefly, 3 things maybe. First of all, once again in the book of Genesis, we see the sovereignty of God. Over and over and over again, that God is behind the scenes. God has supreme authority over all his creation. And that is emphasized from the very beginning of the scriptures. Sometimes we forget this. David reminds us in Psalm 24. He said, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. The 7 years of feast, the 7 years of famine, all the animals, the produce, it's all under God's control. All of it. Everything is under God's hand. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. And we also are reminded, too, that God's not only in control of his own people. Sometimes we start to think, God is just concerned with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No. God is in control of all people in the entire world. Here we see Pharaoh. God gives Pharaoh a dream, and God uses that to have his people come down into the land of Egypt. Solomon says, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. We see here that God controlled Pharaoh and Pharaoh's heart. I think about this verse many times because it seems sometimes that we have to deal with people who are way above our station, if I could put it that way. We depend on people to do things for us when we have no control over the situation. But those people, their heart is in the hand of God, and God is the one who ultimately makes the decision. And that's what we see with Pharaoh, leader of the entire known world. But God worked in his heart to bring about his plan. The second thing I see in this is that Joseph's success as a believer was staying focused on God. That was his success, regardless of the circumstances in his life. Now, I didn't know if I should say this or not because I don't want to be misunderstood. And I am not in any way making a judgment on anyone. Because I know, I'm 65 years old. I know how hard life is. I know the weird things that happen in life. I know the pain that happens sometimes in life. And one of the things, as I get older, really, honestly, I understand less and less. I really do. I used to think when I was a kid, man, adults know everything. I didn't realize they knew less than I did. I knew everything. They knew nothing. But you think about this, and I see, the reason I'm giving this whole preamble is that sometimes in life, you see people go through the exact same event and come out in totally different places. Some people have difficult events happen to them and they lose their faith in God. Some people have difficult events that happen in their marriage and it causes them to divorce. Other people have difficulty in their marriage, it causes them to grow closer. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not saying right, wrong, good, bad. I don't know. But I think that part of the key of success is what happened in Joseph's life, that Joseph stayed focused on God and he was able to ride out the different problems that came up in his life. I think that's really a key. I'm not saying it doesn't result in situations that are painful. I'm not saying it doesn't result in difficult life. I'm not saying that it takes away the pain of life, but I'm saying that Joseph, by staying focused on God, was able to deal with those things. And in Isaiah 26, it reminded me of this verse. You, God, will keep in perfect peace those whose mind are steadfast because they trust in you. Happiness might not be an option in certain situations, but peace with God and trust in God is always an option. And we really don't know what's going on. We really don't know. And we see that in Joseph's life. He was imprisoned 2 years later. You know what? I would have been really angry. I really would have. I would have been discouraged. But Joseph kept his mind on God, focused on God. God gave him peace through the situation. And as soon as Joseph gets a chance to get out, he gives God the credit. So in difficult situations, let's remember to stay focused on God. Again, it's not pain-free, but it's the right thing to do. And the last thing I see from this, I find very encouraging too, and that is that God always has his people ready. They're on the sidelines somewhere, and when the need comes, God brings them out to the forefront. The people of Jacob, the children of Jacob, the descendants of Jacob, we saw were starting to get involved in the land and starting to lose their identity and their uniqueness. God knew he had to get them out of the land of Israel, bring them to another place in order to keep them his unique people. And he knew that centuries before, and he starts to set up the plan. And his plan was really strange in that it involved Joseph and going to prison and all these things. But when the time was right, God brought his person out. And that person became the leader and the protector for God's people. We see the exact same thing with Moses. Hundreds of years later, when the people are slaves in the land of Egypt, and they cry out to God, and the new Pharaoh does not remember Joseph. It specifically said, doesn't remember Joseph, is afraid of the children of Abraham, hates the children of Abraham, makes their life miserable. God had already been preparing Moses. When the time was right, he brought Moses out of the shadows to the forefront. We see the same thing with Joshua when Moses dies. We see the same thing with the prophet Samuel. As the nation started to wander around, bad leader, God prepared Samuel to be their leader. We see it with King David, that the people were getting led astray and turning to idolatry. When the time was right, God brought King David. And ultimately, we see Jesus coming to earth. That things became bad. There was sin in the world. There was no remedy. People's hearts grew harder and harder. And what did God do? He brought Jesus, who had been prepared from before time, out from the sidelines into the forefront. God always has his people ready, regardless of how the situation looks to us. That's a great comfort to me. Nothing catches God by surprise. He's got his people ready. So we could see from this that God has complete authority over everything. That's a comfort to me. We see that staying focused on God helps us to ride through difficult times. Not to enjoy them, but to be able to endure them. And we also see that at the right time, in the right place, God takes his people from the sidelines and he brings them to the forefront. All these things are so evident in the life of Joseph, and especially in this particular chapter when he appears before Pharaoh. Let's pray.